Overqualified. That's what the email said. Zora Williams stared at her phone screen, the rejection letter from Meridian Tech glowing like a neon sign of failure in the darkness of her Chicago apartment. She'd spent 3 weeks perfecting her application, tailored her resume down to the last comma, crafted a cover letter that showcased her expertise without appearing boastful, a tightrope walk she'd mastered over 12 years in the tech industry. And this was the response. 2 sentences, the first thanking her for her application, the second claiming she was overqualified for the senior software architect position. Overqualified? For a senior position she was perfectly qualified for? Zora's thumb hovered over the delete button. The familiar sting of rejection coursed through her, that mixture of disappointment and something deeper, a recognition born from years of similar experiences. Then she stopped. Something felt off. She'd been in tech long enough to recognize the subtle codes, the polite rejections that meant something else entirely. She set her phone down on the marble countertop of her kitchen island, the cool surface a stark contrast to the heat building in her chest. Her apartment was a testament to her success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, modern furnishings carefully selected, walls lined with her patents and awards. Yet here she was, at 34, being told she was overqualified for a role that should have been a natural progression. The irony wasn't lost on her. After her last position at Microsoft had ended, another restructuring that somehow managed to eliminate the diversity initiatives she'd been leading, she'd been selective about her next move. Meridian Tech had seemed perfect. A growing company, innovative work, and according to their website, a commitment to inclusion that seemed genuine. Apparently she'd been wrong. Zora opened her laptop, pulled up the original job posting. Senior Software Architect at Meridian Tech. Requirements: master's degree in computer science or related field, 8 years experience, proficiency in 5 programming languages, leadership experience managing cross-functional teams, experience with cloud infrastructure and AI systems. She mentally checked off each requirement. Master's degree from MIT, check. PhD from the same institution, extra credit. 12 years at companies like Google and Microsoft, check. Proficiency in 8 programming languages, check. Leadership experience leading teams of up to 50 engineers, check. 3 patents in cloud infrastructure, check. Published research in AI ethics, check. But was she really overqualified, or was something else at play? She pulled up her application one more time, scrolling through the carefully crafted responses. Each answer had been thoughtful, specific, showing exactly how her experience aligned with their needs. She'd even researched the company's recent projects, referencing their work on predictive analytics and distributed systems. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister, Maya, who was finishing her computer science degree at Northwestern. "How did the Meridian interview go? Dad's been asking." Zora stared at the message. She hadn't even gotten an interview. She typed back, "Still waiting to hear." It wasn't technically a lie. She was waiting to hear something that made sense. Her father, Dr. Marcus Williams, had been one of the first black engineers at IBM in the 1980s. He'd faced barriers that seemed insurmountable, doors that slammed shut despite his qualifications. When Zora had shown an aptitude for mathematics and technology, he'd been both proud and worried. "The field's changing," he'd told her, "but not fast enough." 20 years later, sitting in her expensive apartment with her advanced degrees and impressive resume, Zora was beginning to understand what he'd meant. She closed her laptop, walked to the window. The city stretched out below her, millions of lights representing millions of opportunities. Somewhere in that sprawl was Meridian Tech's downtown office, where someone had decided she wasn't a good fit without even meeting her. Have you ever had that feeling where you know you're being judged by something other than your abilities? That moment when the polite rejection doesn't quite ring true, when the stated reason doesn't align with the evidence? Zora had felt it before. The Google manager who'd passed her over for promotion despite her leading the team's most successful project. the Microsoft executive who'd questioned whether she'd be comfortable presenting to their biggest clients, the startup founder who'd loved her ideas but wasn't sure she'd fit their culture. Each time she'd wondered if she was being paranoid. Each time she'd given them the benefit of the doubt, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. She returned to her laptop, opened a new browser window. Time to do some research. 2 days later, Zora sat in her apartment, jazz playing softly in the background. Miles Davis, her father's favorite. The rejection still stung, but something else had taken root: determination, and more importantly, information. She'd spent the weekend researching Meridian Tech with the same methodical approach she brought to debugging complex systems. Start with the obvious, then dig deeper. Look for patterns, question assumptions. The company's website showcased smiling faces from different backgrounds. Their annual report boasted about inclusion initiatives, mentorship programs, and commitment to diversity. But their actual employee demographics told a different story. She'd found the data buried in their ESG report, tucked away in a footnote that most people would skip. Less than 2% of their technical staff were Black. Less than 1% were Black women. In a company of 3,000 employees, that meant fewer than 60 Black people total, and perhaps 15 Black women. For comparison, the tech industry average, already dismal, was 3.8% Black employees overall. Meridian was performing below an already low bar, but the numbers only told part of the story. Zora had found more through her network, that informal web of professionals who shared information about companies, managers, and experiences. A former Stanford classmate had worked at Meridian briefly. A colleague from her Google days had interviewed there. A connection from a Women in Tech meetup had been recruiter contacted by them. The pattern was consistent. Diverse candidates were often overqualified or not quite the right fit. Meanwhile, less experienced candidates with more traditional backgrounds sailed through the process. Zora took a sip of her coffee, set it down carefully on the glass table. Her reflection stared back at her. Dark skin, tight coils of hair she'd worn natural for years, the face of someone who'd heard overqualified before. She'd stopped straightening her hair in graduate school, tired of the time and chemical damage. It had been a small act of rebellion that had grown into something larger, a refusal to dim her light to make others comfortable. Her phone buzzed, a text from her former classmate James Chen, now a senior engineer at a competing firm. "Did you apply to Meridian? My buddy works there, says they're desperate for senior architects." Zora's fingers hovered over the keyboard. James was well-meaning, but like many of her male colleagues, he often didn't see the subtle barriers that shaped her experiences. Still, his information was useful. She typed, "They rejected me, said I was overqualified." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. "That's weird. They just hired a guy from my team. Less experienced than you. Want me to put in a word?" Zora smiled wryly. The offer was kind, but it missed the point. She didn't want to get hired because someone vouched for her. She wanted to be hired because she was qualified, which she clearly was. She typed back, "Thanks, but I've got another approach in mind." Instead of responding to James, she opened LinkedIn. Her profile was meticulously maintained. Professional headshot, detailed work history, recommendations from former colleagues and supervisors. She'd learned early in her career that online presence mattered, especially for people who might not fit others' preconceptions of what a successful engineer looked like. She found the profile of Alan Harper, Meridian's VP of Engineering. White man, mid-40s, Harvard MBA. Long history at traditional tech companies, IBM, Oracle, Cisco. His posts were a mix of technical content and corporate leadership advice. No mention of diversity or inclusion anywhere in his feed. Zora studied his background. Traditional path, prestigious schools, blue-chip companies. The kind of resume that opened doors automatically, that never faced questions about cultural fit or being overqualified. She clicked on his team page. 12 senior engineers and architects. 11 were white men. One was an Asian woman, no black faces anywhere. She hit the connect button, then paused over the message field. This was the crucial moment. Too aggressive and she'd be labeled as difficult or confrontational. Too passive and she'd be ignored entirely. She needed to thread the needle. Professional, specific, giving him the benefit of the doubt while making it clear she expected a substantive response. After 20 minutes of drafting and revising, she settled on, "Hi, Alan. I'd appreciate feedback on why my application for senior software architect was rejected for being overqualified. I'm genuinely curious about what aspects of my experience exceeded your requirements, as I believe my background aligned well with the posted job description. Thank you for your time." Direct, professional, specific, giving him room to provide a reasonable explanation if one existed. Her finger hovered over the send button. She'd done this dance before. Push too hard, get labeled difficult. Stay silent, nothing changes. But maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. She pressed send. Then she did something else. She opened a new document and began typing. If she was going to challenge the system, she needed to document everything: dates, communications, patterns. If this was going to be more than just her word against theirs, she needed evidence. The document was titled Meridian Tech, Application Review. She started with the basics: position applied for, date of application, stated requirements, her qualifications. Then she added the rejection email, verbatim. Finally, she added the research she'd compiled, the demographic data, the pattern of rejections, the feedback from her network. As she typed, her phone rang. Her father's contact photo appeared on the screen. "Hey, Dad." "Zora, honey, just checking in. How's the job search going?" She considered her options. Her father had fought his own battles in corporate America, breaking barriers that shouldn't have existed. He'd shielded her from the worst of it growing up, but she'd learned the stories over the years. The meetings where he was the only black face. The projects where his ideas were ignored until a white colleague proposed them. The promotions that went to less qualified candidates. "It's interesting," she said finally. "I'm navigating some challenges." "The same old challenges?" "The same old challenges." A pause. Her father's voice, when he spoke again, carried decades of hard-won wisdom. "You know, when I was your age, I thought if I just worked harder, if I was just better than everyone else, the barriers would fall away. Took me years to realize that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. So what changed? I stopped trying to fit into their system and started building my own. Found allies, demanded accountability, made the invisible visible." He paused. "But you're not me, and this isn't 1985. You have options I never had." "Such as?" "Such as a generation of leaders who understand that diversity isn't charity, it's competitive advantage. You just have to find them." After the call ended, Zora stared at her LinkedIn message to Alan Harper. Her father was right. She had options. She could delete the message, move on to the next opportunity, avoid the confrontation. Or she could make the invisible visible. She left the message. Alan Harper was running late for his 2 p.m. meeting when the LinkedIn notification popped up on his phone. He almost ignored it. Connection requests and messages from job seekers were constant, but something about the preview text caught his attention. Feedback on why my application was rejected for being overqualified." He slowed his pace down the hallway, pulled up the full message. Professional tone. Specific question. Not the usual complaint about rejection, but a request for clarification that seemed reasonable. He looked at the sender's profile. Dr. Zora Williams. The name was familiar, but he couldn't place it. He clicked through to her profile and stopped walking entirely. PhD from MIT, 12 years at Google and Microsoft, 3 patents, published research, leadership experience. The kind of resume that would normally have him reaching for his phone to schedule an interview. So why had she been rejected? "Alan, you coming?" Mark Stevens, VP of Product Development, appeared at his elbow. "Catherine's waiting." "Yeah, sorry." Alan pocketed his phone, but his mind was elsewhere. He'd need to look into this after the meeting. The meeting was the usual quarterly review, revenue projections, product roadmaps, resource allocation. But Alan found himself distracted, thinking about the LinkedIn message. As soon as it ended, he headed back to his office. "Margaret, can you pull the application file for a—" He glanced at his phone. "Dr. Zora Williams, senior architect position." His assistant, Margaret Chen, looked up from her computer. She'd been with the company for 8 years, had seen hundreds of candidates come and go. "The name sounds familiar. When did she apply?" "Last week, I think. She was rejected for being overqualified." Margaret's fingers flew over her keyboard. "Sending it now." The file appeared in his email within minutes. Alan opened it, settling into his chair to review the materials properly. The resume was impressive, more than impressive. It was exactly what they needed. The senior architect position had been open for 3 months. They'd interviewed 6 candidates, none of whom had the right combination of technical depth and leadership experience. Yet here was someone who checked every box, and they'd rejected her without even a phone screen. He scrolled down to the hiring manager's notes. Brian Torres, one of his team leads, had been the primary reviewer. "Candidate appears overqualified for the position. Concerns about cultural fit and long-term retention. Strong technical background but may not align with team dynamics. Recommend passing." Alan frowned. Cultural fit? He'd worked with Brian for 3 years. Good engineer, decent manager, but perhaps not the most nuanced in his people assessment. What exactly did cultural fit mean in this context? He flipped to the next page of the application materials and found Dr. Williams' photo. A black woman with natural hair, professional attire, confident smile. His stomach tightened. Was this what cultural fit meant? Alan had been in tech long enough to recognize the patterns, even if he hadn't always acknowledged them. The way certain candidates were described as not quite right, or maybe too aggressive, or probably wouldn't fit in. The way his teams remained homogeneous despite his stated commitment to diversity. He'd told himself it was about qualifications, about finding the right technical fit. But looking at Dr. Williams' application, that explanation fell apart. She was more qualified than most of the people they'd hired. He pulled up Brian's other recent reviews. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Candidates with names like Michael and David sailed through initial screening. Candidates with names like Lakeisha and Priyanka faced more scrutiny, more questions about fit. His phone rang. Catherine Bennett, the CEO. "Alan, do you have a minute? I need to discuss the engineering hiring pipeline." "Actually, Catherine, I was just reviewing something that might be relevant to that conversation." "Oh, what's that?" Alan looked at Dr. Williams' application on his screen. "We might have a problem." 20 minutes later, Alan sat in Catherine's corner office, the application file spread on her desk between them. Catherine had been CEO for 2 years, brought in to modernize the company and drive growth. She was direct, analytical, and had little patience for corporate BS. "Walk me through this," she said, putting on her reading glasses. Dr. Williams applied for the senior architect position. Brian Torres rejected her application without an interview, citing concerns about cultural fit and claiming she was overqualified. Catherine studied the resume. "Her background is exactly what we need, better than what we need." She looked up. "What's the real reason she was rejected?" "I think—" Alan hesitated. "I think Brian saw something that made him uncomfortable." "Such as?" Alan showed her the photo. Catherine's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. "How many other applications has Brian reviewed this year?" "I'd have to check, but probably 50 or 60. "And how many candidates who look like Dr. Williams has he recommended for interviews?" Alan already knew the answer. "None." Catherine set down the file. "Get me Brian's complete review history. And Alan, get me everyone else's review history too. I want to see if this is an isolated incident or part of a pattern." "Catherine, I'm sure Brian didn't mean—" "I'm sure he didn't either. But intent doesn't matter if the impact is discriminatory." She stood, walked to the window. "We're about to lose a major client because we couldn't deliver on our AI infrastructure promises. Meanwhile, we're rejecting candidates who could probably solve those problems in their sleep. She turned back to Alan. How long would it take to get this data together? A few days, maybe a week if we're thorough. You have 3 days. And Alan, I want to meet with Dr. Williams personally. Should I have Brian call her? Catherine's look was withering. No, I'll call her myself. After Alan left, Catherine sat alone in her office, staring at Dr. Williams's application. She'd built her career on recognizing talent, on finding the people who could solve problems others couldn't. It was how she'd turned around 2 struggling companies before coming to Meridian. But talent recognition required seeing past assumptions, past the comfortable patterns that felt familiar. She'd learned that lesson the hard way, watching competitors succeed with diverse teams while her former companies struggled with groupthink. She picked up her phone, dialed Dr. Williams' number directly. Zora sat at her favorite coffee shop, laptop open, working on a freelance project for a startup in San Francisco. The smell of espresso filled the air, the hiss of the steam wand punctuating the ambient chatter. She'd chosen a corner table, back to the wall, a habit developed over years of working in public spaces while job searching. Her phone buzzed, unknown number with a Chicago area code. Hello? Is this Dr. Williams? A woman's voice, crisp, professional, with the kind of confidence that came from years of making important calls. Speaking, this is Catherine Bennett, CEO of Meridian Technologies. Do you have a moment to speak? Zora's heart jumped. The CEO? She straightened in her chair, grateful for the background noise that might mask her surprise. Yes, of course. I recently reviewed your application for our senior architect position. I'd like to apologize for the way it was handled. Zora said nothing, waiting. Years of negotiations had taught her the power of silence. Your qualifications are exceptional, exactly what we're looking for. I'd like to invite you for an interview, with me directly. The coffee shop noise faded to background. This wasn't how rejection follow-ups usually went. In her experience, rejected candidates might get a form letter months later, or maybe a brief email from a recruiter. CEOs didn't call personally. May I ask what prompted this call? Zora kept her voice level, professional. A pause on the other end. Let's just say some concerning patterns were brought to my attention. I'd rather discuss this in person. Are you available tomorrow? Zora checked her calendar on her laptop. Empty, as usual. The curse of freelancing between full-time positions, either completely overwhelmed or completely free. Yes, I can make tomorrow work. Excellent. 10 a.m. I'll have my assistant send the details. And Dr. Williams, I want you to know that this company is committed to recognizing and recruiting the best talent, regardless of what our initial process might have suggested. The call ended. Zora stared at her phone, mind racing. What had happened behind the scenes, and why was the CEO personally intervening? She opened a new browser tab, searched for Catherine Bennett. The results were impressive. Harvard MBA, former CEO of 2 tech companies, both successful turnarounds, known for operational excellence and building high-performing teams, multiple articles about her leadership style, her focus on data-driven decisions, her ability to transform company cultures. One article from Harvard Business Review caught her attention. Why diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones, a CEO's data-driven approach. The author photo showed a woman in her early 50s, silver-streaked hair, direct gaze. Zora read the article carefully. Catherine wrote about her experience at her previous company, how she'd discovered that their most successful projects were led by diverse teams. She'd implemented blind resume reviews, structured interviews, and objective performance metrics. The results had been dramatic, not just in terms of diversity, but in terms of innovation and financial performance. The data doesn't lie, Catherine had written. Diverse teams make better decisions, solve problems more creatively, and deliver superior results. But achieving diversity requires more than good intentions. It requires systems designed to recognize talent regardless of its packaging. Zora felt a flutter of hope. This wasn't just a courtesy call. Catherine Bennett was someone who understood the business case for diversity, who had the track record to back it up. But hope was dangerous. Zora had been disappointed before. She'd learned to manage her expectations, to prepare for the possibility that even well-intentioned leaders might find reasons to maintain the status quo. She closed her laptop, gathered her things. Tomorrow would be interesting. That evening, she called her father. "The CEO wants to meet with me," she said without preamble. "Of Meridian, the company that rejected you?" "The same one." A pause. "That's unusual. What's your read on it?" "I think someone realized they made a mistake. The question is whether they're willing to do something about it." "What are you hoping for?" Zora considered. "Honestly, I'm not sure. An apology would be nice. An interview would be better. A job offer would be ideal. But mostly, I want to understand what happened and why. And if you don't like what you hear, then at least I'll know where I stand." Her father's voice carried a mixture of pride and concern. "You know, when I was your age, I wouldn't have had the option you have tomorrow. The ability to sit across from a CEO and demand answers. I'm not demanding anything, aren't you? By showing up, by asking questions, by expecting to be treated with respect, that's a demand, and it's one you have every right to make." After the call, Zora spent the evening preparing. She researched Catherine Bennett's background more thoroughly, reading interviews and articles, watching conference presentations. She reviewed Meridian's recent financial reports, their product launches, their strategic initiatives. She wanted to understand not just who she'd be meeting with, but what challenges the company faced and how her skills might address them. She also chose her outfit carefully. Professional but authentic. A navy blazer over a white blouse, tailored pants, minimal jewelry. Her hair in its natural state, styled but not straightened. She'd learned long ago that authenticity was more powerful than conformity. If Catherine Bennett wanted to meet the real Zora Williams, that's exactly who she'd get. The Meridian Technologies lobby gleamed with steel and glass, all clean lines and modern aesthetics. Abstract art adorned the walls, expensive pieces that suggested success and sophistication. A reception desk curved like a wave, staffed by two young women who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate recruiting brochure. Zora approached the desk, noting the diversity of the lobby compared to what she'd researched about the company's actual workforce. The reception area was clearly designed to make the right impression on visitors and potential hires. "Dr. Williams?" The receptionist, a young Asian woman with a professional smile, looked up from her computer. "I'm Sarah. Ms. Bennett is expecting you." She gestured toward a bank of elevators. "I'll take you up." As they rode to the executive floor, Sarah made small talk about the Chicago weather, the traffic, the building's architecture. Zora responded politely, but her mind was focused on the meeting ahead. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that screamed executive privilege, original artwork, fresh flowers, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Through glass doors, she could see a corner office with panoramic views of the city. "Please, have a seat," Sarah said. "Ms. Bennett will be with you in just a moment. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, black please." Sarah disappeared through a side door, leaving Zora alone with her thoughts and the impressive view. She could see Lake Michigan in the distance, the water a deep blue-green under the morning sun. From this height, the city looked orderly, manageable. She wondered if that perspective shaped how executives saw problems, distant, abstract, solvable with the right strategy. "Dr. Williams?" Sarah returned with a coffee service on a silver tray. "Ms. Bennett will see you now." The glass doors parted automatically. Catherine Bennett rose from behind a desk that could have served as a landing pad for a small aircraft. She was smaller than Zora had expected, but her presence filled the room. Early 50s, silver-streaked hair in a sharp bob, wearing a tailored navy suit that spoke of both authority and accessibility. "Dr. Williams, thank you for coming on short notice." Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct. none of the hesitation or awkwardness Zora often encountered in initial meetings. "Please, sit." Catherine gestured to a seating area by the windows rather than the formal desk setup. Less intimidating, more conversational. A power move, but one that suggested dialogue rather than interrogation. Zora settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Catherine took the chair across from her, close enough for comfortable conversation, but not so close as to be invasive. "I've reviewed your application thoroughly." Catherine began, picking up a tablet from the coffee table. "Your work on distributed systems at Google is particularly impressive. The paper you published on fault tolerance in cloud architectures, we're actually implementing some of those concepts in our current infrastructure." "Thank you." Zora was surprised. Most executives didn't dive into technical details this quickly. "I'm curious about your decision to leave Microsoft. The project you were leading, diversity in AI development, seems like it would have been right in your wheelhouse." It was a pointed question, one that got to the heart of why she was sitting here. Zora had prepared for this. "The project was important to me, but it became clear that the company's commitment to diversity was more about optics than outcomes. When budget cuts came, diversity initiatives were the first to go. I decided I wanted to work somewhere that saw inclusion as a competitive advantage, not a corporate responsibility." Catherine nodded slowly. "And what made you think Meridian might be that place?" "Honestly, your website and annual report made it sound like you were serious about building diverse teams. The reality appears to be more complicated." "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." Catherine set down her tablet. "Dr. Williams, I'm going to be direct. Your application was rejected for reasons that had nothing to do with your qualifications. That concerns me deeply." The admission hung in the air between them. Zora had expected deflection, corporate speak, carefully worded explanations. This was refreshingly honest. "We have a problem at Meridian," Catherine continued. "A systemic one, and I need leaders who can help solve it." "What kind of problem?" Catherine pulled up a document on her tablet, slid it across the table. "Take a look at this." The data was damning. Hiring rates by demographic, promotion rates, retention rates. The patterns were clear and consistent. Diverse candidates faced higher barriers at every stage of the process. "This is just the beginning," Catherine said. "We've been collecting data for the past year, and the picture gets worse the deeper we dig." Zora studied the charts, her analytical mind processing the information. "This isn't just about bias in hiring. This is about systematic exclusion throughout the organization." "Exactly. And here's the thing. It's not just morally wrong, it's economically stupid. Our most successful projects have been led by diverse teams. Our most innovative solutions have come from people who think differently. We're literally rejecting the talent we need to succeed." Catherine leaned forward. "I'd like to offer you a position, not just as a senior architect, but as our new director of engineering." Zora blinked. "Director? With a mandate to build and lead your own team. Complete autonomy on hiring, reporting directly to me." Catherine's expression was serious. "We need transformation, not just technically, but culturally." The offer was far beyond what Zora had applied for, a giant leap in responsibility, visibility, and potential impact. It was also a massive risk. "Why me?" The question came out before she could filter it. "Because you didn't just identify a problem, you addressed it professionally and directly. Because your technical credentials are impeccable. And because you understand what it's like to be underestimated." Catherine paused. "This isn't charity, Dr. Williams. This is recognition of excellence that our system failed to see." Zora's mind raced. The opportunity was extraordinary, but walking into a system with embedded biases would be like stepping into a minefield. She'd be under constant scrutiny, facing skepticism from colleagues who might resent her rapid advancement. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to understand exactly what I'm walking into. What does transformation mean to you?" Catherine stood, walked to a wall-mounted display. With a gesture, it lit up, showing organizational charts, financial data, project timelines. Our current engineering team is 94% male, 89% white. Our product development reflects that homogeneity. We're missing entire market segments because we don't understand their needs. She highlighted several data points. Our customer complaints about accessibility, about cultural sensitivity, about user experience. They all point to the same problem. We're building products for people who look like us, not for the people who actually use them. She turned back to Zora. I want you to help us build teams that reflect our customer base. Teams that can solve problems we don't even know we have. And the existing leadership team? Are they on board with this change? Catherine's smile was thin. They will be. Those who aren't can find opportunities elsewhere. It was a bold statement, backed by CEO authority, but Zora had seen bold statements before. She'd seen diversity initiatives launched with fanfare and quietly abandoned when they became inconvenient. I'd need specific commitments, she said. Budget authority, hiring autonomy, protection from retaliation. Done. And I'd need to see the complete data. Not just the hiring numbers, but promotion rates, performance reviews, exit interview feedback, everything. You'll have it by tomorrow. What about resistance? Because there will be resistance. Catherine's expression hardened. Let me worry about that. Your job is to build the best possible team. My job is to make sure you have the support to do it. Zora looked out the window at the city below. This was the moment. The decision that would define the next phase of her career. When would you need an answer? How about now? The directness was refreshing. No games, no corporate dance. Just a straightforward offer from someone who apparently understood the stakes. I have one more question, Zora said. What happens if I succeed? If I build these diverse teams and they outperform the existing ones? Then we scale it across the entire organization. And if I fail? Catherine's expression was steady. Then at least we'll have tried. But I don't think you're going to fail. Zora extended her hand. When do I start? The news of Zora's appointment spread through Meridian Technologies like wildfire. By noon on Monday, her first day, the company's Slack channels were buzzing with speculation, confusion, and in some cases barely concealed resentment. She'd spent the weekend reviewing the complete data Catherine had promised. The picture was even worse than she'd initially thought, not just in hiring but in project assignments, performance reviews, and promotion decisions. The bias was systematic, embedded in processes that appeared neutral but consistently favored certain demographics. But there were also opportunities. Talented employees who'd been overlooked. Projects that had failed because they lacked diverse perspectives. Market segments they'd completely missed because their teams couldn't relate to the target audience. Zora arrived at the office early before the morning rush. She wanted to see the space with fresh eyes, to understand the physical environment where she'd be working. The engineering floor was open concept, all glass and steel with workstations arranged in clusters, whiteboards covered with diagrams and equations, the hum of productivity and innovation. It was also notably homogeneous, row after row of similar faces, similar backgrounds, similar perspectives. The kind of environment that felt comfortable to insiders but might seem impenetrable to outsiders. Dr. Williams? A young woman approached, nervously adjusting her glasses. I'm Jennifer Kim, one of the software engineers. I just wanted to say I'm really excited about your appointment. I've read your papers on distributed systems. Thank you, Jennifer. I look forward to working with you. I was wondering, I've been working on a project that might interest you. It's about accessibility in AI interfaces. I've been trying to get support for it, but Jennifer glanced around, lowered her voice. The leadership team doesn't see it as a priority. They think it's niche. Tell me more. For the next 10 minutes, Jennifer outlined her project. It was brilliant, a way to make AI systems more accessible to users with disabilities, opening up new markets while solving real problems. The kind of innovation that required someone who understood both the technical challenges and the user needs. Jennifer, I'd like to schedule a formal meeting about this. Can you put together a presentation? Jennifer's face lit up. Really? Yes, absolutely. It was a small moment, but it illustrated the challenge ahead. Talent existed at Meridian, but it wasn't being recognized or supported. Part of her job would be finding these hidden gems and giving them the platform they deserved. Dr. Williams? Another voice, this one less friendly. She turned to see a middle-aged white man in a polo shirt and khakis, arms crossed. I'm Rick Martinez, senior architect. I've been here 7 years. Nice to meet you, Rick. Look, I'm sure you're qualified and all, but some of us are wondering how you jumped straight to director without going through the normal process. We've got people who've been waiting for promotions for years. The challenge was direct, public, and calculated. Other engineers had stopped their conversations to listen. This was a test, and how she handled it would set the tone for everything that followed. I understand your concern, Rick. The process was unusual, I'll give you that. Zora kept her voice level, professional. But I'm here because the company needs someone who can solve specific problems. My background in distributed systems, AI architecture, and team building addresses those needs. Right, but I'm not here to take anyone's job or block anyone's advancement. I'm here to build new opportunities. She gestured to the office around them. This company is growing. We need more senior architects, more team leads, more opportunities for everyone. My job is to create those opportunities. Rick looked skeptical, but he didn't continue the confrontation. Other engineers were nodding, some looking interested rather than threatened. I'll be scheduling one-on-ones with everyone on the engineering team over the next 2 weeks, Zora continued. I want to understand what you're working on, what challenges you're facing, and what opportunities you see. This is a collaborative process. She was saved from further immediate challenges by the arrival of Catherine Bennett. Good morning, everyone. Catherine's voice carried easily across the floor. I know there's been a lot of speculation about recent changes, so I wanted to address them directly. The engineering team gathered around, some sitting on desks, others standing. Catherine positioned herself where everyone could see her, with Zora beside her. As you know, we're facing some significant technical challenges. Our AI infrastructure project is behind schedule. Our cloud migration is over budget, and we're missing opportunities in markets we should be dominating. Catherine's tone was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. These aren't failures of effort or commitment. They're challenges that require new approaches. She gestured to Zora. Dr. Williams brings exactly the kind of expertise we need. Her work at Google on distributed systems directly addresses our infrastructure challenges. Her experience at Microsoft with AI development gives us insights we've been missing. And her track record of building high-performing teams will help us scale our capabilities. But why director? Rick's voice again, still challenging but less confrontational. Because the problems we're facing require leadership-level solutions. We need someone who can make decisions quickly, allocate resources effectively, and build teams that can execute at scale. Catherine's gaze swept the room. Dr. Williams has done exactly that at companies that are succeeding where we're struggling. She paused, letting that sink in. I know change can be uncomfortable, but our current approach isn't working. We need to try something different. After Catherine left, the engineers slowly dispersed, returning to their workstations. But the conversations continued in hushed tones, and Zora could feel the mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and anticipation. She spent the morning meeting with Alan Harper, reviewing the current project portfolio and team structure. Alan was professional but clearly uncomfortable with the new dynamic. I've been VP of engineering for 5 years, he said as they walked through the office. I've built good relationships with the team. I'm not here to replace you, Alan. I'm here to help you succeed. Zora stopped by a whiteboard covered with system diagrams. These are impressive architectures, but I notice they're all designed for scale-up rather than scale-out. That's going to be a bottleneck as we grow. Alan studied the diagrams. We've been planning to address that in the next phase. What if we addressed it now? With the right team, we could refactor the core systems in parallel with feature development. That would require significant resources. Resources I now have the authority to allocate. It was a subtle reminder of the new power dynamic, but delivered in a way that focused on opportunity rather than threat. The afternoon brought her first major challenge. A scheduled meeting with the hiring managers, the people who would be implementing her new processes. They gathered in a conference room that felt more like a tribunal than a collaboration. Brian Torres, the manager who had rejected her application, sat at the far end of the table. He hadn't made eye contact since she'd entered the room. "I want to start by acknowledging that this is a significant change," Zora began. "New processes, new priorities, new accountability measures. I know that can be uncomfortable. Are you saying we've been doing our jobs wrong?" This from Susan Walsh, a senior recruiter who'd been with the company for 8 years. "I'm saying our results suggest we can do better. We're missing qualified candidates, we're losing diverse talent, and we're not building teams that reflect our customer base." "Maybe diverse candidates just aren't as interested in working here," Rick Martinez suggested. He'd somehow ended up in this meeting despite not being a hiring manager. "Actually, our application data shows the opposite. We get plenty of diverse candidates. The issue is what happens after they apply." Zora pulled up a presentation on the wall-mounted display. "Over the past year, we've received applications from 847 qualified candidates. Of those, 23% were from underrepresented groups, but only 7% of our hires came from those groups." She clicked to the next slide. "The biggest drop-off happens at the initial screening stage. Candidates who meet all posted requirements are being filtered out before they ever get a phone interview. Maybe they're not as qualified as they appear on paper," Brian said quietly. "Let's test that theory." Zora pulled up a anonymized resume. "What's your assessment of this candidate?" The room studied the qualifications: strong technical background, relevant experience, good schools, progressive responsibility. "Looks solid," Susan admitted. "I'd want to interview them." "This is Dr. Aisha Patel. She applied for a senior engineer position 6 months ago. She was rejected in initial screening for being overqualified." The room fell silent. "Here's another one." A new resume appeared. "Assessment?" "Excellent background," Alan said. "Exactly what we need for the infrastructure team." Marcus Johnson, also rejected for being overqualified. She showed 3 more examples. Each time, the hiring managers expressed interest. Each time, the reveal showed a candidate who'd been rejected without interview. "The pattern is clear," Zora said. "When we can't see names or photos, we assess candidates based on qualifications. When we can see them, other factors enter the equation." "So what are you proposing?" Susan asked. "Blind initial screening, structured interviews, objective scoring rubrics, and accountability for outcomes." "That's going to slow down our process," Brian objected. "It's going to improve our results. And in the long run, hiring better candidates will save us time and money." The meeting continued for another hour, working through the details of implementation. There was resistance, but also growing acceptance as the data became undeniable. As the meeting ended, Brian lingered behind. "Dr. Williams, I want to apologize for your application. I didn't realize." "Brian, I appreciate that, but I don't need an apology. I need you to help make sure it doesn't happen again." He nodded. "I can do that." That evening, Zora sat in her new office, a corner space with windows overlooking the city. She'd inherited it from a previous director who'd left for a startup. The walls were bare, the desk empty except for her laptop and a coffee mug. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister Maya. "How was your first day?" Zora typed back, "Interesting, challenging, promising. Dad wants to know if you're going to change the world." "I'm going to try to change one company. We'll see if that's enough." She looked out at the city lights, each one representing someone's dreams, ambitions, struggles. Somewhere out there were talented people who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Her job was to find them and give them the opportunities they deserved. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, resistance, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in her career, she had the resources and authority to make real change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd made it through day 1, 3 weeks into her tenure, Zora faced her first major crisis. She arrived at the office to find an email from Rick Martinez waiting in her inbox, copied to the entire engineering team. Team, I wanted to share some concerns about the new hiring processes. While I support diversity in principle, I'm worried that we're prioritizing demographics over qualifications. I've attached some data showing that our interview-to-hire ratios have changed significantly since the new policies were implemented. The email was calculated, professional, and completely disingenuous. Zora had expected something like this, but the public nature of the challenge was problematic. If she didn't respond quickly and decisively, it would undermine her authority and embolden other resistors. She spent 20 minutes crafting her response, then sent it to the same distribution list. Rick, thank you for raising these concerns. Transparency is crucial to our success. I'd like to address your points directly. 1. Our interview-to-hire ratios have indeed changed. We're now interviewing more candidates who meet our qualifications rather than filtering them out in initial screening. This is by design. 2. Our actual hiring standards haven't changed. We're still looking for the same technical skills, experience levels, and cultural contributions. What's changed is how we evaluate those criteria. 3. I've attached our complete hiring data for the past month, including anonymized technical assessments and interview scores. You'll see that our hired candidates are scoring higher across all metrics than our previous cohorts. I'm happy to discuss this further in person. In fact, I'd like to schedule a team meeting tomorrow to address any concerns about our hiring practices. She hit send, then immediately called Catherine. We have a problem, she said when Catherine answered. Rick Martinez? You saw the email? Alan forwarded it to me. How do you want to handle it? I want to address it head on. Public challenge, public response, but I need to know I have your backing. You have it. What do you need? Complete hiring data for the past year. I want to show exactly what our previous process was producing versus what we're producing now. You'll have it within the hour. The team meeting the next morning was packed. Word had spread, and engineers from other departments had found reasons to attend. Zora stood at the front of the conference room, a presentation queued up on the wall display. I want to start by thanking Rick for raising his concerns publicly. This is exactly the kind of conversation we need to have. She clicked to the first slide. Let's look at the data. The presentation was methodical, comprehensive, and devastating. She showed hiring outcomes before and after the new processes, technical assessment scores, interview performance, 6-month performance reviews, project outcomes. Under our previous system, we hired 34 engineers in the past year. Their average technical assessment score was 7.2 out of 10. Their average interview score was 6.8. Their 6-month performance reviews averaged 3.4 out of 5. She clicked to the next slide. Under our new system, we've hired 12 engineers in the past month. Their average technical assessment score is 8.1. Their average interview score is 7.6. It's too early for 6-month reviews, but their initial project contributions are tracking ahead of historical averages. But the diversity, Rick started. Let's talk about diversity. Zora pulled up demographic data. Our new hires are 58% white, 25% Asian, 17% Black or Hispanic. Our previous year was 85% white, 12% Asian, 3% Black or Hispanic. She looked directly at Rick. Now, here's the key question. Are our new hires less qualified or are they performing better? The room was silent. Rick, you mentioned being concerned about prioritizing demographics over qualifications. I want to show you something. She pulled up 2 anonymized resumes side by side. Which candidate would you hire? The room studied the qualifications. Candidate A had good experience but some gaps. Candidate B had stronger technical credentials and more relevant experience. Candidate B, Rick said, obviously. Candidate A is Michael Stevens, hired last year under our previous process. Candidate B is Keisha Washington, rejected last year for being overqualified. The point was made. The room was uncomfortable, but the data was undeniable. I want to be clear about something, Zora continued. This isn't about quota hiring. It's about removing barriers that prevent us from seeing qualified candidates. When we do that, we get better outcomes. She clicked to the final slide. Questions? A hand went up. Jennifer Kim, the engineer who'd approached her on the first day. Dr. Williams, can you tell us about the projects these new hires are working on? Great question. Zora pulled up a project dashboard. Marcus Johnson, hired 2 weeks ago, has already identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in our security architecture. Aisha Patel is leading the accessibility initiative that's opening up new market segments. David Chen, yes, we're still hiring qualified white and Asian candidates, is revolutionizing our deployment pipeline. She paused. The common thread isn't their demographics. It's that they're all solving problems we didn't even know we had. After the meeting, several engineers approached her privately, some to express support, others to ask questions, a few to share their own experiences with bias in the hiring process. But it was the conversation with Alan Harper that proved most significant. That was well handled, he said as they walked back to their offices. Rick was testing me. I needed to respond decisively. He was doing more than testing. He was trying to undermine you. Alan stopped walking. I should have shut it down before it got to that point. Why didn't you? Alan was quiet for a long moment. Because part of me wondered if he was right. If we were moving too fast, changing too much. And now? Now I'm wondering why we waited so long to make these changes. It was a breakthrough moment. Alan's support would be crucial for the larger transformation ahead. That afternoon, Zora received an unexpected visitor. Catherine's assistant called to say that someone was asking to see her, someone who didn't have an appointment but claimed it was important. Dr. Williams? The woman who entered her office was young, nervous, clutching a folder. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Maria Santos. I work in customer support. What can I do for you, Maria? I heard about your presentation this morning, about the hiring changes, and I wanted to show you something. Maria opened her folder, pulled out a stack of customer complaint forms. These are from the past 6 months. All complaints about our software being hard to use for people with disabilities, or not working well for non-English speakers, or having interface problems on older devices. Zora scanned the complaints. They were consistent, detailed, and damning. Maria, this is exactly the kind of feedback we need to see. Have you shared this with the product team? I tried. They said these were edge cases, not worth the development time. Edge cases? That's what they called them. But Dr. Williams, these aren't edge cases. This is 15% of our customer base. Zora studied the data more carefully. Maria was right. The complaints weren't random. They represented systematic failures to consider diverse user needs. Maria, I want you to compile a complete report. Every complaint, every pattern, every missed opportunity. Can you do that? Yes, but... But what? I'm just in customer support. I don't have authority to make these kinds of recommendations. You do now. I'm creating a new position, User Experience Analyst, reporting to me. Your job will be to identify problems like this and work with our development teams to solve them. Maria's eyes widened. Really? But I don't have a technical background. You have something more important. You understand our users. You see the problems they're actually facing, not the problems we think they should have. It was another piece of the puzzle. Talent existed throughout the organization, not just in traditional engineering roles. Part of building diverse teams was recognizing that valuable perspectives could come from unexpected places. The next morning, Zora found another email from Rick Martinez. This one was sent only to her. Dr. Williams, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to challenge your methods publicly, and I was wrong about the results. I've been thinking about your presentation, and I realized something. I've been afraid that diversity hiring would somehow diminish my own accomplishments. But that's not how it works, is it? Making the pie bigger doesn't make my slice smaller. The email continued. I'd like to help with the hiring process. I think I could learn a lot from working with you on this. Zora smiled. It was exactly the kind of conversion she'd hoped for. Not immediate, not easy, but genuine. She typed back, Rick, I appreciate your honesty. Change is hard, especially when it challenges our assumptions. I'd be happy to have your help. Let's talk about how we can work together to build even better teams. By the end of her first month, the transformation was beginning to show results. They'd hired 8 new engineers, all scoring above historical averages on technical assessments. They'd launched 2 new accessibility initiatives. And perhaps most importantly, they'd begun to shift the culture from one of exclusion to one of inclusion. But Zora knew the real test was still ahead. Hiring diverse talent was just the first step. The harder challenge would be retaining them, promoting them, and creating an environment where they could thrive. 2 months into her tenure, Zora faced a crisis that would test everything she'd built. The company's flagship AI product, Horizon, was failing catastrophically in beta testing. Customer complaints were pouring in, the stock price was dropping, and the board was demanding answers. She sat in the emergency meeting Catherine had called, surrounded by senior leadership who were clearly looking for someone to blame. "The beta numbers are terrible," Mark Stevens, VP of Product, said grimly. "User satisfaction is at 2.3 out of 5. Customer retention is down 40%. We're going to have to delay the launch." "How is this possible?" demanded CFO Robert Chen. "We've been developing this product for 2 years. "The technology is sound," Alan Harper said defensively. "Our internal testing showed excellent performance." "Internal testing doesn't mean anything if customers can't use the product," Catherine replied sharply. She turned to Zora. "Your team built the core architecture. What went wrong?" Zora had spent the previous night analyzing the beta feedback, and the pattern was clear. But explaining it would require confronting some uncomfortable truths. "The architecture isn't the problem," she said. "The problem is that we built a product for ourselves instead of for our users." "What do you mean?" Mark asked. "Look at the complaints." Zora pulled up her tablet, displaying the beta feedback. Voice recognition fails for users with accents. The interface is confusing for older users. The color scheme is problematic for people with visual impairments. The natural language processing doesn't work well for non-native English speakers. "Those are edge cases," Robert said dismissively. "They're 60% of our beta users." The room fell silent. "We designed Horizon based on our own experiences, our own assumptions about how technology should work. But our team, our previous team, all looked the same, thought the same, had the same cultural reference points." She stood up, walked to the whiteboard. "Here's what I propose. We delay the launch by 6 weeks. We bring in the new engineers we've hired, the ones who actually represent our user base. We let them identify the problems and propose solutions." 6 weeks? Mark's voice rose. "The board will never approve that." "The board will approve it if we can show them a path to success," Catherine said quietly. "Zora, what exactly are you proposing?" "I want to create a rapid response team. Mixed backgrounds, different perspectives, focused solely on user experience. Give them complete authority to make changes, no matter how significant." "That's risky," Alan said. "Riskier than launching a product that customers hate?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it. You have 6 weeks and whatever resources you need." The next morning, Zora assembled her team in the largest conference room she could find. 12 people, representing a cross-section of the company's newly diverse talent. Marcus Johnson, the security expert who'd identified critical vulnerabilities. Aisha Patel, the accessibility specialist. David Chen, the deployment pipeline innovator. Jennifer Kim, the engineer who'd been working on accessibility features. Maria Santos, the customer support analyst who'd become a user experience expert. But also some unexpected additions. Lin Wei, a junior developer who'd grown up in rural China and understood the challenges of limited internet connectivity. Carlos Rodriguez, a recent college graduate who'd been the first in his family to attend university and understood the barriers that technology could create. Sarah Kim, a designer who'd been overlooked for promotion despite consistently excellent work. "This is our user base," Zora said, pulling up demographic data. "Age range 18 to 65. Income levels from $20,000 to $200,000. education levels from high school to PhD, geographic spread from urban centers to rural areas, language backgrounds including English, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, and dozens of others. She gestured to the team. You represent those users in ways our previous team couldn't. Your job is to make Horizon work for everyone, not just for people like us. What authority do we have? Marcus asked. Complete authority. If you identify a problem, you can fix it. If you need to redesign a feature, redesign it. If you need to rebuild a component, rebuild it. What about the existing code base? Aisha asked. It's a starting point, not a constraint. Change whatever you need to change. Over the next 6 weeks, the team worked with an intensity Zora had rarely seen. They identified 47 major usability issues, 23 accessibility problems, and 15 cultural biases embedded in the software's assumptions. But more importantly, they proposed solutions, not just fixes, but fundamental improvements that made the product better for everyone. Lin Wei redesigned the data processing to work efficiently on slower internet connections, which also improved performance for all users. Carlos Rodriguez identified confusing interface elements that were barriers for less tech-savvy users, leading to a complete redesign that was cleaner and more intuitive. Sarah Kim created a new color scheme that was accessible to users with visual impairments while being more aesthetically pleasing overall. The breakthrough came in week 4. Jennifer Kim had been working on the voice recognition problems when she made a discovery. "Dr. Williams, you need to see this," she said, excitement in her voice. Zora joined her at her workstation, where Jennifer had multiple voice recognition tests running. "Look at these accuracy rates," Jennifer said. "Standard American English, 94%, British English, 91%, Southern American English, 73%, African American Vernacular English, 68%, non-native English speakers, 59%. That's terrible. It gets worse. The training data we used was 89% Standard American English. We basically trained the system to recognize one dialect and then wondered why it failed for everyone else. Can we fix it? Better than that. I've been working with a linguist from Northwestern, my former professor. We can create a training dataset that includes all major English dialects plus common non-native speaker patterns. It'll actually make the system more accurate for everyone." Within 2 weeks, the new voice recognition system was showing dramatic improvements, not just for diverse speakers, but for all users. The system was more robust, more flexible, more intelligent. Similar breakthroughs happened across the project. When the team focused on inclusion, they didn't just solve problems for marginalized users, they created better solutions for everyone. The final week before the new launch deadline, Zora found herself working 18-hour days alongside her team. The office was buzzing with activity, whiteboards covered with diagrams, multiple coffee pots running constantly. "Dr. Williams?" Maria Santos approached her desk at 2 a.m. "I just got the latest beta feedback." Zora looked up from her laptop, exhausted but alert. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, really good news." Maria handed her a tablet with the updated metrics. User satisfaction, 4.2 out of 5. Customer retention, up 25% from the original beta. Feature adoption, 78% higher than projected. But the real validation came in the customer comments. Finally, a product that actually works for people like me. The team gathered around Maria's desk reading the feedback. There was exhaustion, relief, and something else. Pride. They'd built something that actually worked for real people. "We did it," Jennifer said quietly. "No," Zora corrected. "We're just getting started." The launch of Horizon 2.0 exceeded every expectation. Within the first month, user adoption was 300% higher than the original projection. Customer satisfaction scores were the highest in the company's history, and perhaps most importantly, they were gaining market share in segments they'd never been able to reach before. The tech press took notice. "Meridian's Inclusive Design Revolution," read the headline in TechCrunch. How diversity drove innovation at Meridian Technologies was featured in Harvard Business Review. Fast Company included Zora in their Most Innovative Leaders list. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Dr. Williams, her assistant, knocked on her office door. "There's a group of students here to see you. They're from the University of Chicago Computer Science program." Zora looked up from her laptop. "Did we have a meeting scheduled?" "No, but they said they're doing a project on inclusive design in technology. They were hoping you might have a few minutes to speak with them." 5 students entered her office, a diverse group that would have been unusual in a computer science program just a few years earlier. 3 women, 2 men, representing a range of backgrounds and ethnicities. "Dr. Williams, thank you for seeing us," said the apparent leader, a young black woman with natural hair and confident bearing. "I'm Jasmine Williams, no relation despite the name." "What can I do for you, Jasmine?" "We're studying the Horizon launch as part of our software engineering course. Not just the technical aspects, but the process you used to develop it." "What specifically interests you?" "How you identified the problems that the original team missed. How you built a team that could solve those problems. How you created a culture where diverse perspectives were valued rather than just tolerated." Zora gestured for them to sit down. "What have you learned so far?" "That diversity isn't just about fairness," said another student, a young man with an accent that suggested he was born outside the United States. "It's about building better products." The voice recognition improvements alone generated $50 million in new revenue. "That's right, but it's more than that. What else did you discover?" Jasmine leaned forward. "That the process changes everything. When you changed how you hired, how you evaluated ideas, how you made decisions, that's what made the difference. The diversity was just the result of fair processes." "Exactly. You can't just add diverse people to a broken system and expect different results. You have to fix the system first." They spent an hour discussing the challenges, the resistance, the breakthroughs. But the question that stayed with Zora came from the quietest member of the group, a young woman who'd been taking notes throughout the conversation. "Dr. Williams, what advice would you give to someone who wants to create this kind of change but doesn't have your authority?" It was a question that got to the heart of the challenge. Not everyone could become a director overnight. Not everyone had a CEO willing to back dramatic changes. "Start small," Zora said. "Document problems, propose solutions, build alliances, and never give up on the idea that you can make a difference." She paused, thinking about her own journey. "A year ago, I was sitting in my apartment, rejected by this company for being overqualified. I could have moved on, accepted that some systems can't be changed. But I decided to push back, professionally and persistently. That single decision led to everything that followed. What if we face resistance? You will face resistance. Count on it. But remember, you're not asking for special treatment. You're asking for fair treatment. You're not lowering standards. You're applying them equally, and the results will speak for themselves." After the students left, Zora sat alone in her office, reflecting on how far they'd come. The transformation at Meridian had been remarkable, but it was just the beginning. Her phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. "Board meeting tomorrow. They want to discuss scaling your approach across the entire organization." Zora smiled. The real work was just beginning. The board meeting was unlike any Zora had attended. Instead of the usual focus on quarterly numbers and cost reductions, the conversation centered on innovation, market expansion, and competitive advantage. "The Horizon launch has been transformative," Catherine began, addressing the 12 board members seated around the polished mahogany table. "Not just in terms of revenue, but in terms of our market position and brand recognition." She pulled up a presentation on the wall-mounted display. "User satisfaction is up 340%. Customer retention has improved by 67%. We're gaining market share in segments we've never been able to reach before. Most importantly," she continued, "we're developing products that work for everyone, not just for a narrow subset of users. That's a sustainable competitive advantage." Board member Janet Morrison, a former Fortune 500 CEO, leaned forward. Catherine, this is impressive work, but I'm curious about scalability. Can this approach work beyond the engineering team? Catherine nodded to Zora, who stood to present her analysis. We've identified similar patterns across the organization, Zora began. In product development, marketing, customer service, even finance, teams that lack diversity consistently miss opportunities and create blind spots. She showed data from their marketing campaigns. Our previous campaigns were developed by teams that were 92% white and 67% male. They consistently underperformed in markets with different demographics. What about cost? Asked board member Robert Kim. Diverse hiring initiatives can be expensive. Actually, they're cost-effective, Zora replied. Our inclusive hiring process has reduced turnover by 45%. Our employee satisfaction scores are at historic highs, and our innovation rate, measured by patents filed and products launched, is up 78%. She clicked to the next slide. The market research is clear. Companies with diverse leadership teams outperform their peers by 25% in profitability. We're not just doing this because it's right. We're doing it because it's profitable. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Board Chair Elizabeth Chen. We want to scale the engineering approach across the entire organization. Inclusive hiring practices, bias training, structured decision-making processes, and accountability measures. Timeline? Asked Janet. 18 months for full implementation. We'd start with customer-facing teams, then expand to operations and support functions. And if it doesn't work? Zora exchanged glances with Catherine. Then we'll adjust our approach, but the pilot data suggests it will work. We just need to be systematic about implementation. The board voted unanimously to approve the expansion. Over the following months, Zora found herself traveling constantly, working with teams across the organization to implement the new approaches. Each department presented unique challenges, but the fundamental principles remained the same. In marketing, they discovered that campaigns developed by diverse teams performed 43% better across all demographic segments. In customer service, representatives who reflected the customer base were able to resolve issues 30% faster. In product development, diverse teams identified market opportunities that homogeneous teams had missed entirely. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The company was becoming known as a place where talent was recognized and developed, regardless of background. Their employee referral rates increased dramatically. Their reputation as an innovative, inclusive employer attracted top talent from competitors. We're not just changing who we hire, Zora explained to a gathering of department heads. We're changing how we work, how we think, how we solve problems. That's the real transformation. 6 months into the expansion, they faced their first major test. A competitor, TechFlow, launched a product that directly challenged Horizon's market position. It was well-funded, technically sophisticated, and backed by a team with impressive credentials. They're stealing our market share, Mark Stevens reported grimly during the weekly leadership meeting. Their product is technically comparable to ours, and they're pricing it aggressively. What's their user satisfaction data? Zora asked. That's the problem. It's good. Not as good as ours, but good enough. Who's their target market? Traditional enterprise customers, CIOs, IT directors, technical decision makers. Zora nodded. And who are we targeting? The same market, but also smaller businesses, diverse user bases, companies that prioritize accessibility and inclusion. So we're competing for different segments? Partially, but there's significant overlap. Then we need to do what we do best. We need to build something they can't. Over the next 3 months, Zora's team developed Horizon 3.0. But this wasn't just a product update. It was a complete reimagining of what AI software could be. The new version included real-time translation capabilities, voice recognition that worked across dozens of languages and dialects, and interfaces that automatically adapted to users' accessibility needs. It was designed from the ground up to work for everyone, not just for traditional enterprise users. The results were dramatic. While TechFlow captured 15% of the traditional enterprise market, Horizon 3.0 opened up entirely new markets, small businesses that had never been able to afford enterprise AI solutions, international companies that needed multilingual support, organizations focused on accessibility and inclusion. Within 6 months, Meridian's revenue had grown by 78%, and they were recognized as the industry leader in inclusive technology design. 3 years after Zora's first day at Meridian, she stood before an audience of 500 technology leaders at the annual Inclusive Innovation Summit. The event, hosted by Stanford University, brought together executives, researchers, and entrepreneurs focused on building technology that worked for everyone. When I was rejected by Meridian Technologies for being overqualified, she began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium. I had a choice. I could accept that rejection and move on, or I could push back and demand better. The audience was silent, attentive. I chose to push back, not with anger, not with accusations, but with professionalism and persistence. I asked questions. I demanded accountability. I made the invisible visible. She clicked to her first slide. That decision didn't just change my career. It changed an entire company. The presentation that followed was comprehensive, data-driven, and inspiring. She showed Meridian's transformation from a homogeneous company struggling with innovation to a diverse organization leading its industry. Our revenue is up 340% from 3 years ago. Our employee satisfaction scores are at historic highs. Our customer base has expanded to include markets we didn't even know existed. She paused, letting that sink in. But the most important change isn't visible in our financial reports. It's in our culture. We've become a place where talent is recognized and developed, regardless of how it's packaged, where different perspectives are valued, not just tolerated, where innovation comes from inclusion. A hand went up in the audience. Dr. Williams, what advice would you give to other organizations that want to create similar change? Start with data. You can't fix what you don't measure. Understand your current state, identify the barriers, and design systems to remove them. Another question. What about resistance? How do you handle people who are uncomfortable with change? You address it directly and professionally. You show them that inclusion isn't about lowering standards. It's about applying standards fairly. You demonstrate that diversity isn't a threat to excellence. It's a path to it. What's been your biggest challenge? Zora thought for a moment. Convincing people that the problem exists. Many well-intentioned leaders don't see the barriers because they've never experienced them. They assume the system is fair because it's been fair to them. How do you overcome that? With evidence, with stories, with results. You make the invisible visible. After the presentation, Zora was approached by dozens of attendees. CEOs wanting to replicate Meridian's success. Engineers sharing their own experiences with bias. Students asking for advice on how to create change in their future careers. But the conversation that stayed with her was with a young woman named Amanda, a recent computer science graduate who was struggling to find her first job. Dr. Williams, I've been interviewing for 8 months, Amanda said quietly. I have a great GPA, relevant internships, strong technical skills, but I keep getting rejected for vague reasons. Not quite the right fit. Overqualified for entry-level positions. Concerns about cultural alignment. Zora looked at Amanda, a young black woman with natural hair, professional attire, and the kind of confident bearing that sometimes made people uncomfortable. Amanda, can I ask you something? When you get these rejections, what do? I move on to the next opportunity. I don't want to seem difficult or confrontational. What if I told you that's exactly what they're counting on, that the system works by discouraging people from pushing back? Amanda looked uncertain. But what's the alternative? If I challenge them, won't that just confirm their biases? Maybe. But if you don't challenge them, nothing changes. And the next person who looks like you faces the same barriers. Zora pulled out her business card. I want you to send me your resume and a list of the companies that have rejected you. I can't promise anything, but I might be able to help you understand what's really happening. You would do that? Amanda, 3 years ago I was in your position. Someone gave me a chance, and it changed everything. Now it's my turn to pay it forward. 2 weeks later, Amanda called with news. 3 companies had suddenly expressed interest in interviewing her. 2 had extended job offers. 1 had apologized for their initial rejection and asked if she was still interested. What happened? Amanda asked. I made some phone calls, asked some questions, mentioned that I was tracking hiring patterns in the industry. Zora smiled. Amazing how quickly overqualified candidates become exactly what we're looking for when companies realize they're being watched. Is that legal? Perfectly legal. I didn't threaten anyone or make any demands. I just asked questions and shared data. Sometimes that's all it takes. Amanda ended up accepting a position at a startup that specialized in educational technology. 6 months later, she was leading a team developing software to help underserved communities access online learning. I never would have had this opportunity if you hadn't pushed me to push back, she told Zora during a follow-up call. No, Amanda, you would have had the opportunity anyway. You just needed someone to help you see it. 5 years after receiving that initial rejection email, Zora sat in her new office as Chief Technology Officer of Meridian Technologies. The company had grown from 3,000 to 8,000 employees. Their products were used by millions of people worldwide, and they were consistently ranked as one of the best places to work in technology. Featured panels on diversity and inclusion. The venture capital firms that funded tech startups were beginning to ask questions about team composition and market accessibility. You started something, Catherine told her during their weekly one-on-one meeting. This isn't just about our company anymore. It's about the entire industry. I didn't start it, Zora replied. I just refused to let it continue unchanged. What's next for you? It was a question Zora had been considering. She'd accomplished more than she'd ever imagined when she sent that LinkedIn message to Alan Harper. But there was still work to be done. I've been thinking about that rejection email, she said. How many other people received similar messages? How many talented individuals gave up rather than push back? What are you proposing? I want to create a foundation. Something that helps people challenge unfair hiring practices, provides resources for building inclusive teams, and holds companies accountable for their diversity commitments. Catherine smiled. That sounds like exactly what the industry needs. You have my support. The Williams Foundation for Inclusive Innovation launched 6 months later. It provided legal support for people facing employment discrimination, offered training for companies wanting to improve their hiring practices, and maintained a database of diversity metrics across the tech industry. But perhaps most importantly, it created a network of allies, people who were committed to making the invisible visible, to challenging systems that perpetuated inequality, and to ensuring that talent was recognized regardless of how it was packaged. The Foundation's first case involved a software engineer named Kevin Park, who had been rejected by 12 companies for being overqualified despite having exactly the experience they claimed to want. Working with the Foundation's legal team, Kevin challenged the pattern of rejections and eventually accepted a position at a company that had initially rejected him. I almost gave up, Kevin told Zora during the Foundation's first annual conference. I thought maybe I really was overqualified, or maybe there was something wrong with my approach. What changed your mind? I read your story. I realized that overqualified wasn't about my qualifications. It was about their comfort level, and I decided I didn't want to make their comfort more important than my career. Similar stories emerged from across the industry. Engineers who had been told they wouldn't fit the culture but went on to lead successful teams. Designers who had been rejected for lack of relevant experience but revolutionized user interfaces. Product managers who had been deemed not quite right but opened up new markets. Each success story created ripples. Companies began to reconsider their hiring practices. Hiring managers started asking different questions, and gradually the industry began to change. The system is still broken, Zora told an audience of computer science students at her alma mater, MIT. But it's breaking in different ways now. The old barriers are being challenged, questioned, and slowly dismantled. What can we do? Asked a student in the front row. You can refuse to accept that overqualified means anything other than highly qualified. You can demand explanations for rejections that don't make sense. You can build alliances with people who share your values. And you can never ever give up on the idea that you deserve to be judged by your abilities, not your appearance. What if we face retaliation? You might. Change is never easy, and it's never without risk. But the alternative is accepting a system that wastes talent and perpetuates inequality. She paused, looking out at the diverse group of students, faces and backgrounds that would have been rare in computer science programs just a decade earlier. You represent the future of technology. You have the power to build systems that work for everyone. But first, you have to get into positions where you can use that power. And that might require you to push back against people who don't want to see you succeed. After the talk, Zora walked across the campus where she'd first fallen in love with computer science. The buildings were the same, but the students were different, more diverse, more inclusive, more aware of the power and responsibility that came with technological innovation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya, her sister, who was now a senior engineer at a major tech company. Saw your MIT talk online. Dad would be proud. Zora smiled. Her father had passed away the previous year, but she could still hear his voice. You have to make the invisible visible. That's exactly what she'd done. Not just for herself, but for thousands of others who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. She'd taken a rejection email and turned it into a movement. But the work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. Each generation would face new challenges, new forms of bias, new barriers to overcome. The key was to keep pushing back, professionally, persistently, relentlessly. Because sometimes rejection isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning. 10 years later, Zora received an email that brought everything full circle. It was from a young woman named Sarah Chen, a recent computer science graduate who had been rejected by multiple companies for being overqualified. Dr. Williams, the email began, I've read your story and followed your work with the Williams Foundation. I'm facing the same challenges you faced, and I'm wondering if you have any advice. Zora read the email carefully. Sarah's resume was impressive. Top grades, relevant internships, strong technical skills. But she'd been rejected by 15 companies in 6 months, always for vague reasons that didn't align with her qualifications. Zora picked up her phone and called Sarah directly. Sarah, I got your email. Tell me about your experience. For the next hour, Sarah shared her story. The interviews that seemed to go well but led to rejections. The feedback that didn't match her performance. The growing sense that she was being judged by factors beyond her control. I've been wondering if I should just give up on the big tech companies, Sarah said. Maybe I should look at smaller companies or consider a different field entirely. Sarah, can I ask you something? When you get these rejections, what do? I move on to the next opportunity. I don't want to seem difficult. Zora smiled. It was the same answer she'd given her father years earlier. What if I told you that's exactly what they're counting on? That the system works by discouraging people from pushing back? But what's the alternative? You make the invisible visible. You ask questions. You demand accountability. You refuse to accept that overqualified means anything other than highly qualified. 3 weeks later, Sarah called with news. 2 companies had suddenly expressed interest in interviewing her. One had extended a job offer. Another had apologized for their initial rejection and asked if she was still available. What happened? Sarah asked. I made some calls, asked some questions, mentioned that the Williams Foundation was tracking hiring patterns in the industry. Zora paused. Amazing how quickly companies become interested in diversity when they realize they're being watched. Sarah accepted a position at a company developing assistive technology for people with disabilities. 6 months later, she was leading a team that was revolutionizing how people with visual impairments interact with digital interfaces. "I never would have had this opportunity if you hadn't encouraged me to push back," Sarah told Zora during a follow-up call. "No, Sarah, you would have had the opportunity anyway. The system just needed someone to help it see your value." As Zora hung up the phone, she reflected on how far they'd come. The tech industry was far from perfect, but it was different than it had been 10 years earlier. More diverse, more inclusive, more aware of the importance of building technology that worked for everyone. But the work continued. Each rejection email was an opportunity to challenge the system. Each overqualified response was a chance to demand better. Each young person who faced discrimination was a reminder that the fight for equality was ongoing. The story that had started with a single rejection email had become a movement. A movement built on the simple principle that talent deserved to be recognized regardless of how it was packaged. And somewhere in the city, another young person was probably staring at their phone, reading a rejection email that claimed they were overqualified for a position they were perfectly qualified for. The question was, would they delete the email and move on, or would they make the invisible visible? The choice, as always, was theirs to make. What would you have done in Zora's position? Would you have pushed back against that initial rejection, or simply moved on to the next opportunity? If you've ever faced rejection that felt based on something other than your qualifications, you're not alone. The data shows these experiences aren't isolated incidents. They're patterns that affect entire industries. But Zora's story shows something powerful. Systems can change when challenged with professionalism and persistence. One person standing their ground can create ripples that transform entire organizations. The most powerful response to unfair rejection isn't anger. It's excellence that cannot be denied, coupled with the courage to demand that excellence be recognized. Sometimes rejection isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a much more important one.